Hi everyone, and welcome back to, or welcome to, One Autistic Person. This is the 30-second video in a 50 video series I'm doing going through the statements of the autism quotient, which is a pre-screening tool that is often used as part of the assessment process for autism. As I was going through the process myself, I realised that we had to look at these statements and these traits as a deficit, and what I wanted to do with these videos is to sort of flip the narrative and maybe look at what the positives and benefits are, and more recently in the videos sort of just looking at these things as the differences that they are rather than necessarily negative. This one is, as I say, the 30-second question, which is statement, not question. I find it easy to do more than one thing at once, and for me, that's definitely disagree. Now, we've kind of already covered this in other videos that I've done, but what I wanted to do with this one was look at it from a different angle and look at it from a hyperfocus / hyperfixation point of view, and I would still definitely agree with that I have both of those things. But also the fact that those two terms are often used interchangeably. I'm not saying that's necessarily incorrect, but I do think there is, for me, a distinct difference between hyperfixation and hyperfocus. I think they're linked, but there is a difference between the two. And doing the research that I've done into this video kind of is looking like that might be how other people may see it. But I just really wanted to go into the idea of it, because the more I've gone down this rabbit hole, as I do with the research for these videos, I have noticed the fact that that there is a distinct difference for me. The way that I experience hyperfocus and the way that I experience hyperfixation are two very different things, and there is a different place in my brain for them. There is a different feeling that I get from those two different things, but there is an intrinsic link for me between the two. So I just wanted to explore one, that the fact that the link's there, but also the difference that I feel with it, and also the fact that might not be the same for everybody. And then look at positives and negatives as I do quite often with these videos, and any adjustments that we can put in place for the sort of challenges that we may face on the back of it. So yeah, for me there is a distinct difference, and a distinct difference in the way that I feel that when I'm hyperfocused or I'm hyperfixated. And the main difference for me, which I'll go into in a second when I actually go into what I see the differences as, but the main difference for me is the fact that my brain feels different. There is a different feeling in my head when I am hyperfixated and hyperfocused. So I am going to explore that bit first, and sort of some explanation of why I think that way, and we'll then have a look at that. So that the first thing I'm going to have a look at is the differences between hyperfocus and hyperfixation. So in this bit, I'm going to look at, for me personally, what the differences are between hyperfocus and hyperfixation in my experience of the world. I am going to give an example of an article I read about an autistic person's parents discussing their perception of the difference between the two, and how that's slightly different to the way that I've perceived it from the way that I'm looking at the situation, but it did lead me to think into more about how I experience this, and I think they're similar, but there is a difference there. But it does show that they are separate entities within a brain, within an autistic brain. I'm not saying that's everyone's experience, and those two things may overlap a lot more for somebody, and may overlap less. I feel mine do overlap, and there is a clear link between my hyperfocus and my hyperfixation, but I don't think they're always linked exactly in the same way. As everything, as I'll say with everything with autism, it's everybody experiences it differently. So this is just the way that I experience it, and like all my other videos, I really would like to hear everybody else's experience of whether they see these as different, and how they experience them. So hyperfocus is very much, to me, how monotropism explains it, that it's generally related to special interests. But it is, in my view, the hyperfocus is transient in nature. In some way it's transient. I'm either able to be pulled away from it with a little bit of me feeling jarred by the situation, or I naturally move on to another special interest or another thing that I can be hyper-focused on, or have to do something that's not a hyper-focus. and I will be dysregulated by having to move out of that, but it's not distressing as necessarily as such. Whereas hyperfixation, to me, is something that takes over my thought process, and for me, it is always on my mind. The thing that I've realised that is my hyperfocus is always on my mind. It's lurking in the background until someone mentions something mildly related to it, or shows a modicum of interest in it, or I watch something on TV, or I watch a film, or I read something that has that relation to it, and then I've noticed that's the part of everything that I then focus on. Mine's quite broad, which I'll get into it in a second, but it's quite a broad fixation, but it's definitely where my fixation lies. Often being hyperfixated will often lead to an uncontrolled monologuing, to a point of talking myself into distress or into absolute tiredness. I will absolutely exhaust myself talking about it, or if you see my video that I've done recently, we'll talk somebody into boredom about it. For many people, this can be a specific subject. It can be a category of subjects. It can be a hobby. It can be areas of work, or it can be specific tasks that you enjoy doing. But it can also be a person or a group of people. And when I was younger, it was kind of people and groups of people that I saw were able to deal with social situations better than me. So I would become fixated in wanting to copy the way that those people were, dress the way they dressed. I wanted to be like those people. I never wanted to be the person, but I always wanted to be like them because I saw them as the pinnacle of where social acceptance was, because they were the popular people. And this was at school and sort of in later education, and kind of right at the beginning of me starting work. That was kind of what it was. I kind of idealized people to the fact that they were able to do this, and they were a caricature of what my thought processes were. So for me, what I realised is that I overarchingly have a need to fixate. I have hyperfixation. My long-term hyperfixation, and this kind of links into people. Is for me, it's kind of observing human behaviour, understanding humans, understanding the individual, but how they fit into how they then fit into a group. So how the group looks. So looking at society, I'm very much about the understanding how society works and understanding how people fit in with society. Very much on the social justice side of things, and trying to really understand why historically we are the way we are from an evolution perspective. But it's very much based on human behaviour and human interaction, and a deep want for everybody to be given equity and to feel like their individual I'm trying to think of the word, their individual benefits that they can give to society are acknowledged, and that each one of us can do that. But also looking at how society treats people. It's very much that is always what is in the back of my mind when I'm doing all sorts. And then that links into, so the way I see it is that's my overarching fixation. And for me, a lot of my intense interests, my special interests that I have, are very much linked to that. And I was thinking about it, it's like The Sims is something that I am interested in. Well, that's simulating reality, and I simulate people's interactions with each other, and I look at how I know it's not real. I know it's not a real thing. I'm not sitting there thinking about the fact that simulations are real, but I am looking at the way that I am able to make Sims interact with each other in a way that I see as positive. Doctor Who, if you strip it right back, it is an observation of human interaction from an alien's perspective, and looking at humanity in a way that is both judging of them. It makes you sort of judge humanity quite often, but look at things in a different way. And certainly in the newer series, but it's always been there in the back of Doctor Who, that it is looking at how people treat each other, and that we should treat each other better. Battlestar Galactica is a huge special interest of mine that I watch over and over again, and all of the stuff around that. That's very much looking at human interaction, and also about the cyclical process of how we seem to repeat behaviours over and over again without changing. Because for me, that's a major issue. The fact that we keep repackaging things but doing it the same way. Society is just repackaged and done the same way. That's a bigger picture for us to talk about. women in history that have been mistreated due to just being women, and how, but also having a voice. Anybody who seemed to have any voice as a woman in the past, I have I've always been extremely interested in that. At work, my focus has often been looking at an individual's an individual's skill set, but also an individual person's need, and then trying to make sure that they fit within the team, that they feel valued, that not only are they of benefit to the organisation I work for, but they know that they are a benefit to the organisation, and that they have a unique set of skills and knowledge and background that can make a big impact positively to the place that I work. One of the best things that I've ever had said to me was somebody who I managed 10 years ago messaged me on LinkedIn and basically said, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for you understanding the fact that I had different challenges to other people. I've been diagnosed as autistic, and I now know that's where those challenges sat. But you acknowledged them before even I understood what they were, and you made it so that I could continue working. And 10 years down the line, he is working as an advocate, and is for veganism, and he has he's done really, really well for himself. And having somebody say that they probably wouldn't have carried on, which is what he said, I probably wouldn't have carried on if it hadn't been for you, because the actual work environment was so stressful. But you, as my manager, made it so that it wasn't, because you saw me as an individual, not as just another employee. And I have been interested in most of the human-based ologies, so anthropology, psychology, sociology, criminology, all of the ologies. I've studied counselling, and I'm studying that again. So it's very much that all of my special interests are based around human interaction. So I've got that overarching hyper-focus of everything goes back to that thought process. Every conversation that I have, I try to find a way of talking about how society should change, where I think society is going wrong, where I think that, and that goes also politics. That's another thing. I have a strong interest in politics, but from a perspective of looking at how we're treated as people, as a whole, but also how individuals can be catered for in a way that they're not currently being catered for. So I look at policing and the criminal justice system, and so that is my main overarching hyper focus. I'm always thinking about those things, no matter what. It's always there in the back of my head. Often autistic people are seen as people who think about multi-led thinking, that it's kind of that categorization of thinking, but I've constantly got that thought process in the back when I'm watching TV programs that other people might not see the societal aspects of it. I often see that and theorize about that, and theorize about what the societal aspects of that TV program are. I think it's why I like quite things like Battlestar Galactica. It's very societal based, but it's also sci-fi and looking at it from a different angle. So it's very political. It's very much looking at all aspects of humanity and the good and the bad that come from everything within humanity. So overarchingly, that is my hyperfixation. So, but they lead to and drive what my hyper focuses are, what my interests are that can be transient, are all linked into that hyperfixate, that overarching hyperfixation for me, that lifelong hyperfixation that I've got. I do have other hyperfocuses that I believe are, if they're sensory based, so roller coasters, for instance, I have a deep interest in roller coasters, a very intense interest that I need to know everything about them, the manufacturer, the speeds they go, the history of them, the backstory and everything. But I think that definitely comes from a sensory perspective, because the reason why I got interested in roller coasters in the first place is because of what it did physiologically to my body and how it made me feel. It was positive, and I wanted to know why. And then that's why that came into play. That I feel like that's a different thing. And I don't have a hyperfixation on anything to do with roller coasters, but I do definitely have a hyper focus on it. And that sort of studying it and things like that is focused on times when new roller coasters come out, or when I'm going to go to go on a roller coaster again. I'll then do all of the looking into it and watching things about it and looking at more information about them. So, like I say, there's an overarching sort of overtaking thinking. So, but then there's also those transient moments of moments. They're not moments; they are very long sometimes. So I'm not saying that they're quick transient moments, but they are transient. And I read an article which I'm going to put the link into, which was from a person who was talking about their son And they were saying that their special interests were sports and music, but their hyperfixation was chess. So he could transition between things in sports and things between different music, and it had a clear hyper focus on it, was intensely interested in it. But chess, if he was playing chess or chess was being talked about, then everything else didn't matter. Nothing else mattered to him, and he didn't want it. Had no interest in anybody around him if they weren't interested in it. That he would, and he was hyper focused on playing chess. So that was how they had the hype. See, I've said hyperfocus. The hyperfocus is still there. It's just a fixation to the point of where nothing else matters. And I think there is an extreme difference between that. And when I'm in a hyperfixated state of thinking about that, nothing else around me matters. That I can literally just be thinking about the social justice, I suppose, that's the social aspects of life, and nothing around me matters. Nobody else, I don't have an interest in anything else. That's a massive focus for me. But like I say, they do feed into my hyper focuses, so I'm constantly feeding that hyperfixation. Whereas that felt like with the person in that article, that not necessarily the sports and music were not necessarily feeding into the chess, and his hyper focus was limited. I don't know how much it was limited by the people around him, and I don't know whether that hyperfixation would become even more if they hadn't maybe been stopped from doing it, or had diversions, which they talked about in the article about diverting his attention from it. And that is kind of some of the techniques that we need to do to make sure that we are doing things. But it's like that hyperfixation, it is that the difference is the fact of it meaning so much to you, and it kind of overtaking thought process. And that's the biggest thing for me. That overarching thought process can often overtake my thought process to a point of nothing else matters, and I have no control over it. I have no control over the monologuing that comes from it, and I can cause myself a lot of distress because of it. So it does have a major impact on my life, and I do it a lot. I realized when I was sort of looking back on it, it's like I do this a lot, and I will change. Conversations that I have with pretty much everyone in my life always end up getting round to that, and I end up talking to the person to the point of where they are fed up of it. So what I'm going to do now is look at the signs of hyperfixation and sort of things that happen to people when they are hyperfixated on something. So let's have a look at that. So some of the signs that you're becoming hyperfixated on a situation would be neglecting self-care. So as much as we do that generally, I think it's or we can do that generally, it can become a major thing that you really aren't caring for yourself. You might completely stop washing. You might completely not eat. You might completely forget to drink. That you're not caring for yourself at all because you've become so hyperfixated on a situation. Ignoring people around you and limiting interaction to only talking about that hyperfixated thought process. And you can be completely engrossed in the activity or research into the topic to the point of where nothing else matters around you, and that's it. You need to completely research it, and for a prolonged period of time. It can mean you lack social awareness and you sort of lose your social skills because of the fact that you are not any social skills that we have sort of can go away, and struggling to communicate about anything but the topic, and potentially relating everything to that fixated subject. So like I say, quite often my conversation will go over to that fixated topic, that overarching fixated topic of sort of people and society, and how society is and how it should be. For me, that's personally how that feels. So yeah, it can become very apparent to the person that is becoming fixated eventually, but also around you. If people are saying this or they're seeing it, then that might be sort of indicators that you're becoming hyperfixated rather than just hyper focused on something. Not being able to be pulled out of it. And not being able, even if it it is jarring when you're taken out of a hyperfocus situation, but a hyperfixation situation, it's kind of like you can't, from my view, the way it is for me, I can't stop myself. I have to keep going. Come hell or high water, it's just I've got to continue. So I'm going to have a look at some positives of hyperfixation. And I'm going to give some examples of how hyperfixation has been positive to some people. So here we go. So as with hyperfocus, hyperfixation can lead to energized focus into something. It can then lead to burnouts and things like that. So that's not necessarily a overarchingly positive thing, but if we can control the hyperfixation, you can get that an energized focus. The ability to constantly practice, improve, and build a deep understanding of something, or build a deep understanding of something. So if it's something that is practical, then you can practice it and you can improve and get really, really good at something. Or you can build a deep understanding of something if it's something that you're researching. So you have a great amount of knowledge on it. I want to, and often the ability to succeed beyond apparent unsurmountable odds. So it's kind of like the idea of it isn't over until I win, which can help with learning difficult skills and also staying true to a cause you feel strongly about. So remember the fact that there are challenges to this, but the fact that it can mean that you can really stay focused on something no matter how hard it becomes. Which can again lead to burnout, so you've got to keep an eye on it. But those that can lead to positive things, which kind of comes to. So I wanted to talk about somebody called Professor Jason Ardy. I'm going to put a picture up, and I'll put a link to his a news article that he did in the Metro about himself. So he was told he would likely spend his adult life in assisted living, being diagnosed with autism and remaining speechless until he was 11 years old. And that he couldn't read and write until he was 18. But he's just become Cambridge University's youngest ever black prime minister professor. He has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in education studies, and at 37 became the youngest black professor in history. That shows that, and he has specifically said that hyperfocus and to an extent hyperfixation, I would say, on becoming a professor, it's what he wanted. He wrote it on his bedroom wall when he was 27 years old that he was going to be a professor at either Cambridge or Oxford University, and at 37 he became that. So it shows that, and he has, like I say, personally accredited hyperfixation to that. And another person I'd just like to highlight, because I absolutely love him, is Sir Anthony Hopkins. He has been quoted as saying his neurodivergency gives him a special edge to understand and portray characters in more depth, because he is able to research in a greater depth. So that's again going to be certainly a hyperfocus situation, but potentially a hyperfixation situation where he's really studied that character. And studied the craft of acting. I wanted to give those really positive viewpoints of what hyperfixation can lead to. Like I say, Jason Ardy has specifically said that sort of very strong hyperfocus, and I'd argue hyperfixation, has been a reason why he's got to where he wanted to get to. I think it also allows you to build relationships with others that share the fixation as well. So it's if you're able to find a group of people who are able to who understand and are fixated on it as well, that's a really good thing, as long as again it's limited and it's not overarchingly taking over your life. But having other people to share that fixation with can allow you to have that space to be able to talk about it in depth, and it'll be enjoyable. So that's a positive thing. So it helps with some social aspects of autism as well. So now let's have a look at some of the challenges. So some of the challenges that hyperfixation may bring are due to rigid and inflexible thought process. This can mean that this can become all-consuming for a person, and that can then potentially lead to burnout if it's not managed. Losing track of time and neglecting important aspects of your life due to a dangerous level, and vital self-care is no longer carried out or seen as important for you. As I've kind of already pointed out previously, can affect personal well-being. It kind of falls into the same boat there, especially if there are negatives attached to the activity or topic, and that kind of falls into my realms of thinking, because obviously looking at the way society treats people and how society should be, and I can't actually control that, is a negative, and it could be a negative. What I have done is sort of realised I can't make huge amounts of changes myself, but I can make small changes, and I can do things to help highlight issues and advocate where I can, as I've done a video recently, probably a bit of a divisive video, but I can make small changes in my world where those things are better for people. You know, the point I made about the person who I managed previously. It can affect personal and professional relationships. So obviously being hyperfixated on something, and if it's always brought back to that, and I have found this, that people don't want to listen to the fact that I'm talking about that again, because the thing that I'm talking about is quite deep and quite complicated and it can be quite a big thing for somebody to have to listen to, so that can be difficult from a personal relationship perspective, but certainly from a professional relationship perspective. If somebody starts talking about something around society, I can sometimes get into conversations that are not great to be having with people in a business, in a professional setting. So I have to control myself quite a lot in those situations, which can be quite painful. And it may even be able, may even stop you being able to continue with your work. For instance, say you might get so obsessed by it that in a given situation that it makes it impossible for you to continue doing your work, and you become so fixated on it, then that's the day gone, and you're going to be fixated for the whole time, and it can lead to making it so tasks aren't able to be carried out, including work tasks, which obviously is a huge challenge and something that can negatively impact you in the long term. So with those challenges put forward, let's have a look at some of the adjustments that we can put in place and how we can manage some of those challenges if we do face them. So some of the things that I can think of that maybe I do, or something that I maybe should do, is restrict time for focus on the hyperfixation, for the things that is a fixation for you, and also maybe try to soft land yourself out of a hyperfixation discussion or a hyperfixation focus with a hyperfocus activity with a special interest before going back to the real world. So something you know that is potentially related to it, or something that you are going to be able to change your focus to first, and then work through getting back into sort of reality from that special interest, or that thing that you can hyper focus on, and then you can sort of soft land yourself out of it, rather than going straight into or get back into the big scary stuff of not talking about your fixation when you've been fixated on it. Find other people who are interested in it and talk it to death with them, but understand the fact that you know, don't focus on that all the time. And again, find ways to make sure that you can come back into your life where that's not the case, so that you're giving yourself the fact that you're giving yourself time. Those two things are kind of interlinked, I suppose. You're giving yourself the time with the people that want to hear it. If you have people in your life that you trust to tell you when you are hyperfixating, give them the permission and come up with a way of them telling you. So it's a sort of having the conversation, saying, I know that I do get hyperfixated on this thing. Can you tell me when I am? And sort of, this is how I'd like you to tell me. Exercise, meditation, or other well-being related activity may be able to refocus our attention. So exercise gives you something to do, so therefore you're not necessarily focusing on it, and again may help you transition back into not being hyperfixated. Meditation is a funny one, because it might mean that you end up hyper-focusing on it if you're not great at meditation. If you're able to meditate and think and sort of get out of that thinking and that cycle by meditating, great. I'm rubbish at meditating. I then end up thinking about my hyperfixation when I am actually meditating, so it would be pointless for me. But exercise, on the other hand, I don't think about much when I am exercising, apart from the exercising, but most of my exercising is done on this switch on a game, so I'm focusing on the game. But it might be that rather than exercise or meditation, it might be playing a computer game or something like that, kind of linked again to the hyperfocus situation. But even if you're not hyper-focused on them and they're not your special interests, just something that's going to divert your attention away from it. If you do hyperfixate, trying to find a way to embrace this is a positive thing. Don't try and stop it at all. Don't try and stop it, because you're not going to be able to anyway. So there's no point in trying to stop it. Try to find healthy ways to divert focus if you can. Not all of us can, and too much pushing away from this can also be unhealthy for us. And if you are, or someone you love, have issues with this, finding outlets to focus this may be better for you. So like I say, that's kind of links to all of those things there, is that you might have to find ways of talking about that hyperfixation in a way that is healthy for you, that's not going to impact your relationships around you and isn't going to burn you out. So so limiting it, restricting it to where it's going to be beneficial to you, and sort of get yourself to a point where you're able to talk about it, or to research it with somebody, or whatever it is that you're going to do. But the fact that I don't believe pushing away from a hyperfixation is the right thing to do. I really don't. I think it don't try and stop it, because we can't stop it. It's going to be there. Like I say, it's the thing that's in my head all the time, and I wonder whether that is the same for most people who are hyperfixating. And the only reason why it shows intermittently is because we have to. So, and that's great. That's great that we have to do that, because we shouldn't be hyperfixating on it. But we shouldn't be hyperfixating on it all the time. We should be finding other things to be able to not hyperfixate on it, because that's not going to help, having one thing that we're thinking about all the time. If we're able to not think about it all the time, it's healthy for us to think about or do other things. But it also isn't healthy to stop us from doing it. So just be clear on that for yourself, that you don't want to stop yourself from doing it. You just want to manage it. So that's my thoughts on this. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, how this affects you, and how you manage it, and what your thoughts are on this. As always, if like I say, commenting is always the most important. I'd love it if people would subscribe. It does get my videos out there much more. I noticed that 67% of the time people watch my videos, that they're not subscribed, which is kind of good. I like the idea that that shows that it's getting out there to people who are not subscribed to me. But if you subscribe, then it helps the channel. Plus, you'll see if I put other videos up. I'm wondering whether the reason why people aren't subscribing is they don't really want to watch my videos, which is fair enough in itself. But if you did want to subscribe, just a reminder that you can, because I forget all the time that you can subscribe. Or don't forget that you can subscribe, I just forget to do it. But as always, like I say, comments are always the top priority for me. I want everybody to be able to communicate with each other, and I think it's a really healthy thing for us to do as autistic people. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.